My name is Richard Hale. I am 62 years old, and for nearly 3 decades, I worked as a chief financial officer at Midwest Industries, one of Chicago's largest manufacturing companies. 30 years dedicated to spreadsheets, risk analysis, and decisions that move millions of dollars. Yet my true passion was always my family. Laura, my wife, and our children, Brian and Melissa, were the center of my existence. Every bonus I earned, every raise I received, I thought of them first. When Brian wanted his MBA at Northwestern, I paid the $40,000 without hesitation. When Melissa decided to open her boutique in Lincoln Park, I financed the initial $100,000. For Laura, there were no limits. Trips to Europe, a new Lexus every year, our dream house in Winnetka. At the company, they called me the silent calculator, a reserved, analytical man whose calm demeanor was his trademark. But in the months before retirement, something began to shift. Laura seemed distant, always whispering on the phone and cutting conversations short when I entered the room. Brian and Melissa started asking strange questions about inheritance, my investments, and what would happen after. The day of my retirement party finally arrived, a small gathering in our backyard with family and close friends. I was genuinely happy, thinking of the plans Laura and I had made, traveling the country in our new RV, visiting future grandchildren, maybe a little winter house in Florida. But in the middle of the party, everything collapsed. Laura walked over with a smile that did not reach her eyes, carrying a manila envelope. "Richard," she said coldly, "I have a retirement gift for you." Inside were divorce papers. My vision blurred as I read. Irreconcilable differences, division of assets, alimony. She leaned close and whispered, "I don't want to take care of an old retiree. Richard, you understand, don't you?" I looked around and saw a man I didn't recognize standing by the gate with a smug smile, and then my eyes turned to Brian and Melissa, who exchanged knowing glances. "You knew," I managed to say. Brian shrugged. "Dad, you have to understand, Mom deserves to be happy, and we need to think about the future too." Melissa nodded, adding, "Your investments, the company, it's a lot to manage. Maybe it's better left to us." In that moment, I realized it was never about Laura's happiness. It was about money, my money. They thought I was an easy target, an aging retiree who would sign away everything, maybe even die soon, leaving them with a fortune. But they underestimated me. Calmly, I folded the papers, slipped them into my pocket, and said, "All right, I'll sign." The party went on, but I was absent, watching Laura laugh with a stranger, seeing my children whisper as though dividing my assets before the ink was dry. What they didn't know was that for the past 5 years, guided by my cautious CFO instincts, I had diversified my investments. Offshore accounts, funds under other names, hidden stock portfolios they could never touch. 3 days later, I signed the divorce papers, dividing assets exactly as Illinois law required. Laura got the house, half the joint accounts, standard alimony. The children got some stocks and access to a fund I had set up years earlier. They thought they had won, but really they had lost. The very next day, I disappeared, not literally, but to them it was as though I had vanished. I canceled my phone, closed social media, and moved to a 10-acre cabin in rural Oregon outside Bend. No neighbors, no questions. Calls and messages poured in at first. Laura about alimony, Brian about company funds, Melissa demanding answers. But I ignored them all. Summer turned to fall, then winter, and in silence I began transforming. I built a small office in the cabin. 3 monitors, satellite internet, everything a professional investor needed. My decades of experience became my greatest weapon. Within 6 months, I doubled my capital. In a year, I tripled it. While others lost fortunes in meme coins, I made calculated moves in blockchain companies with real fundamentals. But money was only part of it. I rebuilt myself into Richard Hale 2.0. I exercised daily, hiked Oregon trails, ate healthy, grew a beard, and wore clothes that finally reflected who I was instead of corporate suits. I even learned guitar, something I had always wanted to do. On one of those morning walks, I met Clara, a 52-year-old bookstore owner with silver hair and a radiant smile. Also divorced, childless, but full of life. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, and within months, she became the light of my new life. "You have an energy about you," she told me once, "like someone who has suffered, but come out stronger." She was right. After 8 months, we married in a simple courthouse ceremony, just us, two witnesses, and the certainty of something real. 6 months later, we adopted Lily, an 8-year-old girl whose parents had lost custody due to neglect. Watching Clara care for Lily and hearing her call me Daddy without hesitation gave me a love I had never truly known. Meanwhile, my fortune grew beyond anything I had during my marriage. Tech startups I invested in were acquired by Silicon Valley giants. My stock portfolio generated dividends larger than my CFO salary, and I bought land, properties, and stakes in private equity funds. But more important than the wealth was happiness. Clara and I built a simple, rich life with Lily. Family dinners, mountain trips, evenings of Scrabble while she did her homework. For years passed, and then came the first sign from my old life. My lawyer in Chicago called. "Richard, your ex-wife is trying to reach you. She wants to renegotiate the alimony. Apparently, she's facing financial difficulties." Financial difficulties? How interesting, I thought, and then asked about my children. Had they also made contact? My lawyer, Dr. Peterson, nodded and explained that Brian had mentioned problems with his business, while Melissa's boutique had closed the previous year, and she was now seeking financial advice. For the first time in 4 years, I smiled, thinking of my former family. "Dr. Peterson," I said calmly, "please inform them that Richard Hale does not wish to be contacted. If they insist, you have full authorization to take any legal measures necessary to ensure my privacy." He hesitated, pointing out that they seemed genuinely desperate. "I know," I replied with quiet certainty. "That is exactly how I planned it." It was time for the final phase of my plan, the part one had waited patiently to set in motion. They had discarded me because they believed I no longer had value. But now they would discover just how much I was worth and how costly it was to lose me. The following months unfolded like a symphony of desperation, and I observed it all from a distance, as though I were a conductor watching his most intricate composition play out flawlessly. Dr. Peterson became my source of information about their collapse. "Richard," he told me one cold winter morning, "your ex-wife Laura is in serious trouble." The man I had once seen at my retirement party, Marcus, had revealed his true nature. He wasn't a successful businessman at all, but a professional con artist who had quickly identified Laura as a perfect mark, a newly divorced woman with access to a large sum of money. He convinced her to invest $200,000 from the asset division, plus another $50,000 she withdrew from the emergency fund I had left her, into his fictitious import company. Months later, Marcus disappeared with the money, leaving Laura to discover that the company had never even legally existed. The documents were forged, the office was rented month to month, and Marcus Johnson wasn't even his real name. "She's living in a one-bedroom apartment in Cicero now," Peterson continued. "She lost a house in Winnetka, couldn't keep up with the mortgage without your supplementary alimony." Yes, the alimony. Another piece of my careful planning. When I signed the divorce papers, my official income was calculated solely on my base salary at Midwest Industries. All of my substantial wealth was secured through holdings and trusts that weren't considered regular income. This meant her alimony was based on a far smaller figure than she expected. Laura had assumed she would live comfortably on $1,200 a month, plus the returns from the investments she received in the divorce. But the investments I left her were the very ones I knew were on the verge of collapse. Midwest Industry stock. For example, I knew about the company's competitiveness problems long before they became public. And within months of our divorce, the stock plummeted by 60%. The other funds I left to look strong on the surface but were high risk, artificially inflated investments I knew would eventually crumble. "And your children?" I asked. Peterson sighed. Brian invested heavily in a cryptocurrency startup that promised to revolutionize digital payments. He put in everything, the money from the divorce settlement, a loan against his house, even his children's college fund. It was a Ponzi scheme. He lost about $400,000. I shook my head, not surprised. Brian had always been impulsive, always chasing the fastest results and the easiest shortcuts. I had tried to teach him patience and discipline, but he preferred instinct over sound judgment, and now that instinct had cost him his family's future. Melissa, Peterson went on, her boutique went bankrupt last year. She expanded too quickly, opening 2 more stores without the capital to sustain them. When the pandemic hit, she was paying rent for 3 premium locations in Lincoln Park without enough revenue to survive. She's about $200,000 in debt now. Melissa, my daughter who always craved luxury, who wanted the best of everything, had never understood what it meant to run a sustainable business. I had financed her first boutique, knowing she lacked the temperament, seeing clearly that she was more in love with the glamour of being an entrepreneur than the harsh realities of retail economics. They're looking for you more urgently now, Peterson continued. Laura called my office 17 times last week. Brian sent me a 3-page letter begging for a conversation, and Melissa has been offering apologies, swearing she'll never again be part of any conspiracy against you. That word, conspiracy, struck me as ironic. At last, they were admitting what I had always known, that the retirement party had been set up. Richard, they're desperate, Peterson said. Laura is considering filing for personal bankruptcy. Brian may lose his house, and Melissa is living with her mother in that small apartment in Cicero. I listened quietly while sitting on the porch of my ranch, watching Clara and Lily in the yard. Our home was no longer a small cabin, but a 600-acre ranch with sweeping views of the Cascade Mountains. Lily was laughing as she taught Clara how to ride one of our horses, their joy echoing across the valley. And as I listened to Peterson describe the ruins of my former family's lives, I realized I felt no anger, no sadness, only the deep, steady satisfaction of a man who had been underestimated, discarded, and betrayed, but who had emerged stronger, wealthier, and truly free. Dr. Peterson, I finally said, they can keep trying to reach me, but my decision remains the same. Richard Hale does not wish to have any contact with those people. I understand, he replied. But, Richard, what if they try to track you down physically? Laura even mentioned hiring a private investigator. I smiled. They're welcome to try, but what they'll find is that Richard Hale of Chicago, Illinois no longer exists in any public record. The man they're looking for disappeared 5 years ago. And it was true. I had officially moved my residence to Oregon, restructured all my businesses under complex corporate holdings, and even adjusted certain details of my civil registry. Nothing illegal, of course. Just a careful use of the American legal system that I knew well after 3 decades as a CFO. But, Richard, they're still your family, Peterson said gently. No, I replied, watching Lily run toward the house, laughing as she shouted, Daddy, Daddy, look what I learned. I pointed toward her. My family is here. Those people in Chicago were just an expensive lesson I had to pay for in trust and loyalty. It was time, I decided, to close that chapter forever. On a clear spring morning, exactly 5 years after my so-called retirement party, I sat at home with Clara making pancakes in the kitchen and Lily practicing Chopin on the piano for her upcoming recital. The house was filled with warmth, music, and laughter when the phone rang. Peterson again. Richard, there's been a development. Laura is in the hospital. I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no sadness, only a curious emptiness where 3 decades of emotions once lived. What happened? I asked out of courtesy. Severe anxiety attack, he said. She's being treated for depression and overwhelming financial stress. Brian even called my office in tears. He's begging for just 5 minutes with you. Says he needs guidance to save his family from bankruptcy. I looked at Clara smiling at me from the kitchen, at Lily waving from the music room, and I knew my answer. 5 years ago, I was a man who had given his life to people who saw me only as a bank account. Now I was a husband, a father, a partner, and finally my own man. Doctor, I said, I want you to send them each the same letter. Can I dictate it now? He agreed. I took a deep breath and spoke the words I had been holding inside. Dear Laura, Brian, and Melissa, the man you discarded 5 years ago no longer exists. What remains has not forgotten. You judge me as a worthless old retiree, but you have now discovered the cost of that miscalculation. There will be no second chance, no reconciliation, and no financial rescue. You made your choices based on greed and convenience. Now live with the consequences. Sincerely, Richard Hale. Peterson hesitated. That's it. No, I said. Include a photo. That afternoon, Clara, Lily, and I posed in front of our home. Not the small cabin I started with, but the 600-acre ranch we had built into a life. Behind us stood the stone and wood mansion with sweeping mountain views, the stables, the Tesla parked in the drive, and even the small plane I bought for weekend trips. I wore jeans and a flannel shirt. Clara glowed in a simple summer dress. Lily hugged our golden retriever. Duke and all of us were smiling, genuinely, effortlessly. On the back of the photo, I wrote by hand, "The Hale Family, Oregon 2024. Built on love, not money." 3 weeks later, Peterson called again. "Richard, your letter had impact." Laura called my office 46 times in a single day. Brian sent a 12-page letter that reads more like a confession of guilt than anything else. And Melissa, she showed up in person. I raised an eyebrow. And she admitted you had won. She said they finally understood it was never about money, but about respect and loyalty. She asked me to tell you they're proud of the man you become, though they know it's too late. When I showed her the photo, she was silent for 5 minutes, then whispered, "He looks 20 years younger. I never saw him smile like that when he lived with us." I couldn't help but think of the irony. Did she say anything else? Just one question. "Are you really happy?" Peterson asked. She already knows the answer. I replied. Then, carefully, Peterson asked me something more personal. "Do you feel any satisfaction in their suffering?" I thought about it. Satisfaction? No. Relief? Absolutely. For 5 years, I carried the weight of anger and betrayal like a stone in my chest. That stone is gone now, not because they're suffering, but because I built something better. Their collapse doesn't bring me joy. It brings me closure. So there's no chance you'd reconsider? They are your biological family. I shook my head. Family isn't defined by DNA, doctor. It's defined by daily choices of love, respect, and loyalty. Clara chooses me every day. Lily chooses me every day. I choose them every day. That's family. Laura, Brian, and Melissa also made their choices. They conspired against me, used me, and discarded me. Those were choices too, just not the kind that build anything worth keeping. 6 months later, I received the final update. Laura had moved into a subsidized assisted living facility. Brian found work as an accountant at a small firm in Rockford, rebuilding slowly but never regaining what he lost. Melissa went back to school at 42 to become an elementary teacher. They survived, and that was enough for me to know. Today, 2 years after sending that letter, my life is full in ways I never imagined possible. At 15, Lily is applying to universities with scholarship she earned on her own. Clara has expanded her bookstore into 3 cities and is considering writing a novel. And me at 67, I am happier than I ever thought I could be. My fortune continues to grow, but it no longer exists to impress or support people who see me as a wallet. It exists to build a legacy of love and purpose. Sometimes Clara asks if I miss my old life, and I always answer the same. You can't miss something you never really had. The betrayal of Laura, Brian, and Melissa wasn't the end of my family. It was the beginning of my real life. The greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so good, so full, that they become irrelevant. They taught me that love can't be bought, but it can be lost. That family is not a right, but a privilege. And that sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't anger. It's indifference born from a life truly well lived. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment telling us what you thought. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified of more stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.